Okay.
I just read it to you. Did you not hear me read it? It says, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. Now, the reason I did that is I just wanted to highlight what I've been talking about on Apocalypse Now. That's the name of this class. This is the second class. And I made the point last week that you have to understand the literature that you're studying for it to make sense. And so let's say that America, 1,000 years from now, America's gone. I hate to think that, but we're just imagining. And some archaeologists are out here digging around and found this poem. And they no longer have poetry. They don't have poetry. And there's some countries even today that poetry is not based on rhyme like ours is. It's based more on repetitions of thought. And so they dig this up and they say, okay, what is this? What would they, and let's say that they think, well, this describes the people of America. This describes something about them. What would they think it describes?
That poem you're asking us, what would it describe?
Yeah.
To them.
To them 1,000 years from now?
Yeah.
Death's function?
Well, wouldn't they think that death is a person?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were.
Well, is death a person? So would they get that wrong? And so they're going to think that death is a person that meets you, that will stop for you, and or you could stop for it. Mm-hmm. And then they don't know what a carriage is. They've never seen or experienced a carriage. So are they able to understand this statement at all? Not really. Especially if they're trying to give a literal interpretation to it. Okay? Well, how do we understand it? Why can we understand it and they can't? You don't understand it?
Well, I can make up.
Huh?
We all die.
Yeah.
For one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but because when we see it, do we know it's a poem? We don't have to be told that it's a poem, do we? And so a poem is made up of metaphors, and so we know that we're to give it a figurative interpretation, to understand it figuratively. And symbols, they're symbols, Death is a person that you meet, or he meets you, and a carriage, and all of that. Those are symbolic pictures. They're pictures of a truth. Okay. Well, the same is true with apocalyptic literature. First century Jewish apocalypse. The book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 1, says the revelation of Jesus Christ. The Greek word there for revelation is apocalypse, apocalypse, where we get our English transliteration, apocalypse, apocalypse, which means to uncover, to reveal. Well, he wasn't just saying the revelation of Jesus Christ, he's saying the apocalypse, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ. And that expression was a key expression, because apocalypse was a style of literature. So as soon as John uses the apocalypse the Apocalypse of Jesus Christ, the readers, the Jewish Christian readers, or even the Jewish readers, would understand that he's using this style of literature. If I had to start out saying this is the poem of Emily Dickinson, as soon as I said the word poem, your brain immediately shifts into understanding it figuratively or a poetic style. So the receivers of the Apocalypse of John, or of Jesus Christ, revealed to John, would understand that it's a style of literature. And this style first began to be developed by the prophets. And they didn't do it as their own imagination. These expressions were revealed to them by God himself. God wanted to use what we call apocalyptic language, or what I call apocalyptic language, to describe how he's going to deal with their enemies, or even how he's going to deal with them for their ungodliness. And the prophets used it. We looked at Isaiah 13 last week. We'll look at another text from Isaiah this morning. And then it became really popular with Daniel, and Isaiah was around 700 BC. Daniel is around 500 BC or a little later. The view on Daniel is that Daniel's visions were given and understood and then recorded by someone else. I don't know whether I buy that or not, but that's possible. Doesn't make it invalid. It just says they're able to give, they usually give a later date to Daniel, much later date to Daniel. So if we take Daniel at its word, he was taken into captivity around 600 BC. And he was alive when they deported to Babylon, and when the Persians who defeated Babylon sent the Jews back home. Well, that's a long time. That's 80, 70 years, something like that. So, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Daniel used a lot of apocalyptic expression. He's famous for that. We'll look at that book. And then when we come down to, good morning, when we come down to the intertestamental period, what's the dates for that?
Well, you mean about 400 BC down to about
Birth of Jesus.
Whenever that is, 4th,
Yeah,
6th
yeah.
BC.
Right. The literature in there, the scholars call it Second Temple literature, because it's a literature that came out during the Second Temple period, after the temple had been rebuilt, after the Jews came back from captivity in Babylon. There was a lot of literature. Esdras, Maccabees, third Maccabees is apocalyptic. Esdras is apocalyptic. They used a lot of apocalyptic literature expressions that I believe was because of Daniel and the popularity that these expressions, this type of literature, gained in dealing with judgment scenes and blessings. So they can describe the judgment as well as the blessings. Now, a lot of the judgment and blessing scenes come from actual judgments and actual blessings. Like the stars falling out of the sky, or the stars being darkened, the moon being turned to blood, the sun refusing to show its light or being darkened, the earth being moved out of its place. What might that be describing where that literally happened? How about the flood? And what God promises is a new heavens and a new earth. What might that describe?
Shifting
Again.
of power.
Huh?
Shifting of power.
Well, that's what it represents. But it also describes, I believe, this is my opinion, I've not read any scholars that agree with me. They don't disagree, they just don't discuss it. That I believe that when Noah came off of the ark, what did he find? A new heaven and a new earth. Why a new heaven? Because Immanuel Velikovsky, in a book called Ages and Chaos, believed that the earth came within collision course of a comet, giant comet, which eventually bumped into Mars, settled into orbit, and became Venus. And you say, that sounds weird, but Einstein had that book open on his desk when he died. And Velikovsky had some notes from Einstein saying that he was coming over to believe that. So, as crazy as it sounds, okay, scientifically it could work. So, and the idea is that the magnetic pole, the magnetic attraction of this giant, as big as a planet, came within collision course of Earth, that the idea is that the Earth flipped on its axis. And all the water, the magnetic pull of that pulled all the water out of the depths of the Earth, and all the water would shift its place and all of this. So if that happened, if that happened when Noah stepped off the ark, and they were very familiar with the constellations, those were their maps. When he looked into the sky, what did he see?
It's a different sky.
A different heaven. And when he looked at the earth, what did he see? A different earth, a new heaven and a new earth. That's my opinion, but I believe that when it talks about a child playing at the hole of a poisonous snake, he says there's going to be peace on my mountain. Child play at the hole of the adder. The lion will lay down with the lamb. What does that describe? It describes Eden, the blessings of Eden, when God dwelt among his people. So the judgment scenes usually will come from some of the old judgments, but with some new stuff added, like the angels coming in flaming fire. That's new. So old judgments and old blessings are pulled into these symbols that you have in apocalyptic literature. Okay. So what we've established so far is, like this poem, which is a style of literature that once you understand it's a poem, your brain knows how to interpret it. Apocalypse is the same way. It was a style of literature that was popular for about 400 years before Christ, and even during the time of Christ, and immediately in the first century. I mean, Jesus uses apocalypse to describe a judgment. John uses apocalypse in the Revelation, in the book of Revelation, or the book of Apocalypse. What are you understanding me to say so far?
You're going to interpret.
I'm going to interpret the poem.
No, I was going to tell us that.
All of it is mostly a figurative book, and that
Yeah.
we need to look at it as a figurative speech.
Yeah,
That it's not something that we want to take as literal as most people try to take it.
Yeah, we don't want to take it literally. It would be like trying to take this poem literally. It's not intended to be taken literally. Death is not a character to meet or to meet you. And so, and you don't ride to the grave in a carriage. Well, you might ride to the grave in a carriage, but my point is just as silly as it would be for us to try to take this poem literally, the first century Jew, if they were hearing how the churches today try to handle the book of Revelation, they would consider that silly. What are you doing? That's not the way you're supposed to understand this. Okay? So, as soon as I realized that, I began to just do a study on that type of literature. And I used some books that do that research, but also did my own research, went through and looked at places where apocalyptic, apocalypse is used. And we looked at, again, let's turn back over to Isaiah 13. That's where we ended last week, and we'll quickly review it again. Isaiah 13, beginning with verse Let's start with verse 9. Behold, the day of Yahweh, and I say Yahweh because Lord there is in small caps, and that's what the translators did. Instead of translating the name Yahweh, some Bibles use Jehovah, which is a Germanized form of Yahweh, Yehovah. And
I always thought it was English because we English are good at anything. Mispronouncing foreign names.
Yes. Yeah, mispronouncing foreign names. I became very aware of that when I learned to speak Greek. And I came back here and I would mispronounce Spanish terms because I'm not Spanish. And people would get on me about, I never did say it, but if you go in and say, I want a taco, or tortilli, people would think, no, it's pronounced this way. And then they turn around and use Greek terms. Probably a fourth of our language, maybe a third, is from the Greek language. And we slaughter it. I mean, we don't even come close to pronouncing it the way the Greeks would. So I became very aware of that.
I spent just a couple of weeks in Athens, and I found out everything you said is true. I'd studied Greek for 4 years before a Christian got there. They don't pronounce it right. The vowels are all wrong.
Exactly. The same.
Yeah.
I took German in high school for 4 years. Lived in Germany for 3 years. Couldn't speak a lick of German when I got there because it was the dialects, and you get different areas, and you.
Yeah.
My experience with Greek is you go in there, they told us how to say good morning. Good morning in Greek is kalimera. Good afternoon is kalispera. Good evening is kaliniki. Doesn't sound anything at all like I thought it was. But for the first couple of days, I kept greeting people kalimari. In other words, good squid to you.
Yeah, good. That's what it means. Calamari is good squid. Yeah. Yeah. It's strange. Language is a strange thing.
It changed. The rules of pronunciation changed.
Yeah. So, anyway, Lord there, and they started doing this because the Greek translation called the Septuagint, which was done about in the 3rd century BC in Alexandria, Egypt. They didn't want to translate the Hebrew word Yahweh, so they translated it Lord, Kyrios. And so they translated it Lord, and so most of the English translations adopted that. And so if this text here, behold, the day of Yahweh is coming, and they say the day of the Lord is coming. Cruel with fury and burning anger to make the land desolation, he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil. And then on down to verse 13, therefore I shall make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place at the fury of Yahweh of hosts in the day of his burning anger. So, how do I know that's apocalyptic? because many people would say, well, that's the end of the world. That, if you take it literally, what is that?
Sounds like it's coming.
It's the end of the world, right? If you take it literally, it's a dismantling, a destruction of the known heavens and earth, the universe. But if you come to verse 1 of chapter 13, the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. So what's it about? Who's it for? It's for Babylon, and it's an oracle concerning Babylon. And then you come down to verse 17. Behold, well, look at verse 19. And Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And then in verse 17, behold, I'm going to stir up the Medes against them. And so that's how it happened historically. Historically, Israel was in captivity. They'd been in captivity for about 70 years. The Medo-Persian Empire starts tromping over the face of the earth in that area, and they go in and defeat the Babylonians. And a Persian king sits down on the throne and lets Jews go back home to Israel.
I think that's where we get in the biggest trouble, is that people pull this part, this 9 through 15, pull that part out, and they forgot to look at verse 1 and verse 17 through 19.
That's true, but even more basic than that, they failed to recognize what was said there as a type of literature, as a type of speech. If God had used a poem in there, we would have recognized that as poetry.
We call it hyperbole.
Yeah.
Or exaggeration for the sake of emphasis.
Hyperbole, metaphors. These are metaphors. And someone, I think it might have been Gail last week, says, can these have a literal interpretation in the future? Well, they could. If we believe 2 Peter 3, where he describes the burning up of the heavens and the earth, some people take that as an apocalyptic piece by Peter, and that it's to be understood figuratively. I personally don't take it that way, because Peter uses a phrase that other apocalyptic writers don't use. He says, seeing that these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought we to be? So he uses, as he goes in and gives an explanation for what he just described, he talks about it, I think, in a literal way, and not in an apocalyptic way.
So you're saying that cannot be used as patterns for the future.
I think it's possible. Do I believe that?
But it's patterns for the future, for the destruction of Babylon. That isn't that.
Well, there's a good book that kind of deals with some of that. It's called The Moses Connection in John's Gospel. My point is that the Old Testament is used in a patternistic, that's probably not a good word, but as a pattern. And that the things that the Old Testament describes were understood to be reenacted in the future.
The place names and people. So the Hebrew method is to put the whole nation in one name, like Ephraim stands for the northern kingdom. And Babylon, since it was a very prosperous city, it's on the banks of the river. I've even seen books called The Richest Man in Babylon. It's where all the trade was. It stands for all of the secular, extreme wealth and excess. The way that name is still used, even in the New Testament. She who's in Babylon greets you. Hebrews talks about somebody being in Babylon, and Babylon by then was nothing like what it was at this time. Am I right or am I?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Nobody does, so don't worry.
Babylon continued to exist both as a city but also figuratively. It was used to represent what Babylon had gone through. God used Babylon to judge Israel, and then God judged Babylon because they did it.
Yeah, the literal city of Babylon, but since it stands for the forces in opposition to God's people, and it stands for all the wealth and excess that Babylon was
Yeah.
for,
It's used metaphorically that way a lot in the Bible. So, okay, let's kind of push forward here a little bit. Look at Isaiah 34. Let's see. Verse 1, draw near, O nations, to hear, and listen, O peoples. Let the earth and all it contains hear, and the world and all that springs from it. For Yahweh's indignation is against all the nations, and his wrath against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has given them over to slaughter. So their slain will be thrown out, and their corpses will give off their stench, and the mountains will be drenched with their blood. And all the hosts of heaven will wear away, and the sky will be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts will also wither away, as a leaf withers from the vine, or as one withers from the fig tree. The sky. Have you heard that expression? The sky is going to be rolled up like a scroll. Yeah. How is it applied today?
You're in Fort Myers.
Yeah. Well, it's applied as the coming of the Lord. God's going to return. The sky's going to be rolled up like a scroll. People use that today. But you read the verse 5, for my sword is satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon whom? Edom. And upon the people whom I have devoted to destruction. This was a judgment scene against Edom. Look at verse 8. For Yahweh has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for the cause of Zion, and its streams shall be turned into pitch, and its loose earth into brimstone, and its land shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched night or day. Its smoke shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall be desolate. None shall pass through it forever and ever. Is that true? I mean, we know where the land of Edom was. Do we look in that direction and see smoke ascending from it?
You see a temple carved into the side of the canyon with a petra.
Yeah.
And that was uninhabited. It's not something that happened in a day. It happened over time. And that wasn't even the Edomites. That was the Nabatean Arabs. They had overtaken the land from the Edomites.
Right.
They, as a people, disappeared. Just like somebody pointed out, you'll hear about Israelites, but you won't hear about Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites, Hittites, or any of those others.
Right. Well, it says here that its smoke, that its land shall become a burning pitch. Did that happen? No. It shall not be quenched night or day. Its smoke shall go up forever. Did that happen? No.
Still be there.
Yeah, so would we decide, okay, that didn't happen then, so it's going to happen in the future? That's kind of the way people are thinking. No, these were metaphors. These were figures of speech to describe how serious and how vast and how strong God's judgment really is. And it's not to be taken literally. When you start trying to take it literally is when we get into trouble, and that's what's happened amongst those who believe in premillennialism. They take these passages literally. And it's their failure to see and understand that this was a type of expression that came to be referred to as apocalypse. And the Jews understood this was figurative.
you would tell us what the Jews thought that smoke was going to be, or that whatever that was.
They understood it to be a figure of speech. Like if I said, I'm so anxious to get home, all you're going to see is the smoke of my tires.
It just describes how you feel and how you want to get there.
Yeah. But if I said what I just said, I want to get home so bad today, there's something happening at my house, all you're going to see is the smoke of my tires. Well, are you going to see smoke of my tires? No. How are you supposed to understand that?
You want to hear him get home.
I'm in a hurry. That's all it means. It's a metaphor. It's a figure.
So they looked at it as that it was going to be a punishment.
They understood it was going to be a severe punishment. God was really ticked off with
Yeah,
them.
he was smoking.
And so he describes a total desolation of the land. So much that he goes on and says, verse 11, but the pelican and hedgehog shall possess it, and owl and raven shall dwell in it, and he shall stretch over it the line of desolation and the plumb line of emptiness. That's not true today. I mean, that never happened. But what's he trying to say? This is a big deal. I'm going to judge these people for what they've done. And that's the way we should understand it. Look at Isaiah. Look at Isaiah 19. We're still in Isaiah. Isaiah 19. The oracle concerning Egypt. So who is this about? Egypt. Well, what is he saying about Egypt? Behold, Yahweh is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. So I will incite Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will each fight against his brother, and each against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. All through Isaiah, the good thing about Isaiah, and the reason I use Isaiah, is because he says clearly who it's about and what it's about. But in that, he uses what came to be known as apocalypse, as apocalypse expressions. And so this was used for several hundred years. Until we come to Jesus in Matthew 24. Look at Micah.
Can I ask you a question about
Certainly.
19:1?
About what?
About Isaiah 19:1, where it says, behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud.
Yeah.
Is that referring to Jesus?
No.
Okay, because I have it in my Bible that it's referring to Jesus.
That's a good question. So this poem, you said 1,000 years from now, if people read that poem, they wouldn't understand it. And that's kind of like if you said, today we would understand this. I hope it's not another 9/11. We would understand that.
Right.
But years from now, they may not understand that terminology.
Right.
But we would understand it as being something terrible, of destruction, people hurt, and things like that.
Right. See, we develop metaphors. We develop cliches. We develop figures that mean something to us, but they don't mean anything to people that hadn't experienced it. Back to this 19:1, he says, behold, Yahweh, the Lord, is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. Well, do we read about the Lord coming on a cloud anywhere else? In the New Testament, we do. And Jesus uses it.
So
are you saying that's a apocalyptic also?
Yeah. It's an expression of judgment. Basically, all it is an expression of judgment. What is coming on a cloud? What would that mean to you?
That he's sovereign, he reigns.
That it's from heaven.
Yeah.
And who's going to come riding on this cloud? Well, in the New Testament, but here it's Yahweh. And why is he riding on a cloud?
Just establish his authority.
Not good news for
And is about to come to Egypt.
Egypt is, tell me if you agree that Egypt has never been the power they were in the time of Moses. Throwing those Hebrew babies into the Nile doomed them. But they're always a regional superpower. They tried to balance things in the south, and they were trying to stand off against the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Syrians, and so forth. And then they got sideswiped by the Romans and the Greeks. But they wanted to be the main power, and they got used, or they used Israel as their buffer, and Israel would try to make an agreement with them to hire them as the bully to hold off the other bullies, the Mesopotamians coming down. And the reason the punishment is laid upon them is because they failed to do it.
Well, and also in the divided kingdom, the Egyptians of the southern kingdom tried to make buddies with the Egyptians to hold off the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, or the Assyrians. And then Egypt put in a vassal king, and he rebelled, and so they invaded Jerusalem and took the Ark of the Covenant out. The Egyptians walked off with the Ark of the Covenant. And you probably saw what is it, Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yeah.
That's why it shows in that movie that they go down and find it down where? In Egypt. In a dig, in a tell in Egypt. And so that little part of it was historical. So Egypt continues to play bad guys with Israel, both the north and southern kingdom. And so it's not unexpected to have God saying, hey, I'm going to judge you for this. And how does he describe the judgment? The Lord is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence. Well, did the idols tremble?
No.
Not literally. Idols are just statues. Of course, technically an idol means a false god, but when we think of an idol, it's a statue of that false god. And what's the point of me reading this? It's just to point out that this type of picture, and the way we should read apocalyptic is, here's a picture. Because usually these were delivered to the prophets, and especially John, as a picture. John says that he was shown this picture, and he writes it down. So what he writes down is what he saw, a picture. And so we've got a picture that has a meaning behind it. And that's how we are to approach when we come to this real bizarre pictures of God riding on a cloud, or the stars falling out of the sky, or the sky being rolled up like a scroll, and the earth being shaken out of its place. When we see bizarre images like that, we need to understand that these are metaphors. These are just pictures that have meanings behind them. Okay, we're out of time, but let's look at one last text, Matthew 24. Let's see, that's in the New Testament.
Did we ever cover Micah?
We will. I'll start that with next class.
Thought I missed it.
Matthew 24, look at verse 29. Jesus is speaking here, and he's speaking to a crowd that he's that are his disciples, but also there's some Pharisees around, I believe. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of heavens will be shaken. Well, where do those expressions come from?
The Old Testament.
They come from the Old Testament. Well, what does he mean here when he uses them?
As an example. Judgment will be good.
There's judgment coming. There's judgment. There's judgment. And if we say, well, who is the judgment against? Well, the context of this, go back to Matthew 23, the last three verses, verse 37, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. Desolation is a term used strongly by Isaiah, but the house is what? What is the house of Israel? It's the temple. For I say to you, from now on you shall not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And this is an exact quote from the Septuagint, from the if you remember the Greek translation of Psalm 118:26. So when we come over here and read of verse 29 that we just read, and verse 30, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Where have you read that before? Yeah, Isaiah. Then it was Yahweh coming on the cloud. But to do what? To judge. So when we read this, what should we understand? It's judgment. And he's using apocalyptic expressions, something that those Jews were very familiar with. As soon as they hear the stars falling out of the sky stuff, fear has got to enter their hearts, because they know what that means. All right, we're way out of time here. Sorry.
Wow.